Today's story was submitted by an anonymous viewer. Let's call him Elliot, who swore that he would never, under any circumstances, set foot in Europe again, let alone the remote French countryside. The tale you are about to hear is not a conventional ghost story. It does not feature phantoms in the attic or demons under the bed. Instead, it is a chilling reminder that the most terrifying monsters are not the ones hiding in the dark, but the ones we invite into our hearts. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and listen closely, because what happened to Elliot could easily happen to any of us who have ever felt lonely enough to look for love in the digital abyss. It all began with a simple message on a grief support forum. Elliot had just lost his mother to a sudden illness, leaving him utterly alone in his small apartment in Chicago. The silence of his home was suffocating, and the internet became his only refuge. That was where he met Mark. Mark was, by all accounts, perfect. He was a French architect supposedly living in a picturesque, secluded village in the Rhône Alps region. His messages were eloquent, deeply empathetic, and filled with a warmth that penetrated the thick fog of Elliot's depression. They started with text messages, sharing their daily lives, their fears, and their deepest secrets. Soon, the text turned into hours-long phone calls. Mark's voice was smooth, a soothing baritone with a slight, charming accent. He knew exactly what to say to make Elliot's chest flutter. He was patient, validating every emotion Elliot felt. There was only one minor red flag: they never video called. Mark always had an excuse. A broken camera, a poor internet connection in his rural village, or simply a deep-seated insecurity about his appearance. Elliot, blinded by affection and desperate for connection, brushed it off. He had fallen in love with the soul, not the face. After 6 months of intense digital romance, Mark finally extended an invitation. "Come to me, Elliot. Let me take care of you. My village is a hidden gem, a place where time stands still. You can heal here." Elliot didn't hesitate. He drained his savings, packed a suitcase, and booked a one-way ticket to Lyon, France. Upon arriving, he took a series of increasingly remote trains and buses until he was dropped off at a misty, forgotten crossroads. There, waiting by a classic vintage car, was Mark. He was breathtaking, tall, with dark tousled hair and striking features. When they finally embraced, Elliot felt a surge of pure joy, but there was something immediately peculiar. Mark's skin was incredibly cold, almost like polished marble, and his scent was absent. Not just odorless, but devoid of the natural human scent of sweat, laundry detergent, or even the crisp autumn air. It was a vacuum of scent. Still, Elliot was too enamored to care. Mark drove him to the village of Saint-Morel. It was a place straight out of a postcard. Cobblestone streets, ivy-draped stone cottages, warm glowing street lamps, and a charming little bakery at the corner. It was peaceful. It was perfect. It was the beginning of the nightmare. The first few days were a romantic blur. They took long walks, drank wine, and sat by the fireplace in Mark's rustic home. But as the initial euphoria began to fade, Elliot started to notice the cracks in the pristine facade of Saint-Morel. It started with the smallest of sensations. Elliot realized that the village was entirely devoid of ambient noise. There were no birds chirping in the morning, no wind rustling through the ancient oak trees, no distant hum of traffic or airplanes overhead. The silence was absolute, heavy, and unnatural. Then there were the villagers. They were always smiling, always polite, but their interactions felt incredibly hollow. Every morning at exactly 8:03 a.m., the baker would sweep the front of his shop with the exact same rhythmic motion. At 20:15 p.m., a woman would walk her golden retriever past Mark's window, her footsteps falling perfectly in sync with the ticking of the grandfather clock in the living room. One afternoon, Elliot tried to strike up a conversation with the local butcher. The man just smiled a blank, unblinking smile and repeated the same phrase. "Beautiful day for a roast, monsieur. Beautiful day for a roast." Elliot tried to discuss these oddities with Mark, but Mark would simply kiss his forehead and tell him his city-worn nerves were playing tricks on him. And whenever Mark touched him, Elliot felt a strange, draining sensation. It wasn't the exhaustion of a busy day, it was a deep, existential fatigue. The horror truly set in on the 5th day. Elliot woke up with a headache and reached for his phone to look at a photo of his late mother. As he stared at the screen, a chilling realization washed over him. He couldn't remember her voice. The memory, which had been crystal clear just a week ago, was gone. Panic setting in, he tried to recall the name of his childhood dog gone. The memory of his first kiss, gone. It was as if someone was going through the filing cabinets of his mind and systematically shredding the folders. That night, Elliot feigned sleep. Once he was sure Mark was completely still beside him, Elliot slipped out of bed. The air in the house felt heavy, like breathing through thick syrup. He crept downstairs and out the front door into the cobblestone streets. The village was pitch black. Not a single street lamp was on. Elliot walked toward the bakery, intending to look through the window. He tripped over a loose stone and fell against the side of the building, but it didn't feel like stone. It felt like tight, hollow canvas. Heart-pounding, Elliot scratched at the stone wall. His fingernails peeled back a layer of thick, painted fabric. Behind the canvas was nothing but dark, wooden scaffolding. Trembling, Elliot ran to the neighboring house and pushed the front door. It swung open to reveal nothing. No living room, no furniture. Just a dirt patch supported by wooden beams, holding up the fat cat of a house. The entire village was a movie set, a sterile, artificial construct. Suddenly, Elliot heard a sound behind him. The slow, deliberate crunch of footsteps on the cobblestones. Did you really have to look behind the curtain, Elliot? It was Mark's voice, but it lacked the warm baritone resonance. It sounded metallic, layered, echoing as if spoken by multiple voices at once in an empty cavern. Elliot slowly turned around. The street lamps violently flickered to life, casting long, grotesque shadows. Mark stood a few feet away, but he was changing. The handsome, human face began to melt and distort. The skin lost its color, turning a translucent, sickly gray. His eyes, once deep and loving, expanded into massive, pitch black voids that swallowed the light. His jaw unhinged, revealing a dark, endless chasm instead of a mouth. What are you?" Elliot choked out, stumbling backward. "I am what you needed me to be," the entity hissed, gliding forward without moving its legs. "You humans carry such heavy burdens. Grief, heartbreak, loneliness, they weigh you down. I simply relieve you of them. Your love, your memories, your sorrow, they are so delicious, so nourishing." Elliot's mind raced as the sickening truth clicked into place. The missing memories, the chronic exhaustion. Mark wasn't a lover. He was a parasite, an ancient, non-human entity that fed on intense human emotions and memories. It had scoured the internet, hunting for the most vulnerable, heartbroken prey it could find. It had lured Elliot here, constructed an illusion based on Elliot's own romanticized fantasies of France, and had been slowly draining him dry every time they embraced, every time they kissed, every time Elliot felt a surge of love. "You're almost empty now," the creature whispered, reaching out with elongated, multi-jointed fingers. "Just a few more memories, Elliot. Give me the memory of your mother's funeral. The pain is so exquisite." Adrenaline, sharp and primal, finally pierced through Elliot's fatigue. It was an emotion the entity hadn't expected. Pure, unadulterated rage and the desperate will to survive. Elliot picked up a heavy prop cobblestone from the street and hurled it straight into the entity's hollow face. The creature shrieked. a sound like grinding metal and screaming children, and recoiled. Elliot didn't wait. He turned and sprinted toward the edge of the village. He ran past the fake bakery, past the canvas houses, bursting through a massive, painted backdrop of distant mountains. Behind the backdrop was a dense, terrifyingly real, and freezing forest. Elliot plunged into the dark woods, branches tearing at his clothes and skin. He could hear the entity gliding through the trees behind him, its voices whispering his name, mimicking his mother, his friends trying to lure him back with the echoes of the memories it had stolen. "Elliot, please? It's me, Mom. It's so cold out here." He clamped his hands over his ears and ran until his lungs felt like they were bleeding. He ran for what felt like hours, driven by pure terror, until he finally broke through the tree line and tumbled down a muddy embankment, crashing onto the hard asphalt of a deserted highway. Elliot was found 3 hours later by a passing truck driver. He was hypothermic, covered in scratches, and babbling incoherently about a fake village and a monster wearing a human face. The local authorities were called. When the police investigated the coordinates Elliot provided, they found nothing. No cobblestone streets, no bakery, no canvas walls. Just an empty, overgrown clearing deep in the woods, littered with hundreds of old, rusted cell phones and discarded wallets dating back decades. The village of Sainte Morel did not exist on any map. Mark had vanished without a trace, likely moving on to construct a new illusion for his next victim. Elliot managed to return to Chicago, but he did not return whole. He survived, yes, but the cost was unfathomable. To this day, Elliot lives in a hollow state. He knows he had a mother, he knows he loved her, but he cannot recall a single detail of her face, her laugh, or the way she hugged him. The entity took the most precious parts of his soul, leaving behind a shell of a man who jumps at every notification on his phone and sleeps with every light on in the house. If you are listening to this right now, feeling lonely, scrolling through forums in the dead of night looking for a connection, be careful who you open your heart to. Not everyone behind a screen is human, and some entities are just waiting for the perfect moment to invite you to their village. If you were the character in this story, what would you have done? My name is Arthur. For 7 years, I was the night guard at Central Station. After midnight, the massive 3-level underground station belonged only to me and the buzzing fluorescent lights. It was a boring, peaceful job. Until last November. The anomaly didn't strike all at once. It seeped in like sewage water. First came the smell. A putrid odor drifted from the sealed air vents of level B3. It smelled exactly like burnt, rotting meat mixed with copper and ozone. Next, old Silas, a homeless man who slept near the B1 escalators, vanished. His sleeping bag was left behind, smeared with a viscous black sludge that reeked of that exact same B3 stench. Soon, the air grew suffocatingly heavy. Security cameras began glitching with white static. In those split-second flashes, I swore I saw elongated, pale silhouettes darting across the empty halls at impossible speeds. The climax hit at 2:45 a.m. during a massive thunderstorm. An alarm blared. Camera feeds showed the heavy steel door to level B3 had been breached. Thinking it was vandals, I grabbed my flashlight and stun Baton. As I descended, the cold bit into my bones. The heavy blast door had been peeled back from the outside. No human could do that. The flooded level B3 was pitch black. I crept forward until I heard it. Squish crack. It sounded like someone aggressively chewing bone and gristle. I hid behind a pillar and peeked out. Under the red glow of a dying emergency light, I saw it a dweller of the deep. It was over 7 feet tall, crouching over something unrecognizable. Its limbs were grotesquely elongated, bending at sharp, unnatural angles. Its skin was pale and translucent. I could literally see black veins pulsing underneath. Suddenly it turned. Its face was completely smooth. No nose, no ears, just two hollow, pitch black eye sockets. Its jaw unhinged all the way to its chest, revealing 3 rows of jagged teeth, dripping with black slime. Paralyzed by fear, my flashlight slipped. "Sealange!" The monster snapped its head toward me. From its throat came a horrific, rapid sound. Click, clack, click, clack. It wasn't a threat. It was a hunting call. Instantly, from the dark tunnels and air vents, hundreds of clicks answered. Hollow black eyes snapped open in the shadows. A massive swarm of pale, writhing creatures began crawling along the walls and ceiling, rushing toward me. I ran. Behind me was the deafening sound of hundreds of claws scrambling across tiles. One lunged its claws, shredding my jacket and slicing my shoulder. Screaming, I threw myself into the security control room and smashed the emergency lockdown button. Boom! Dozens of slimy bodies violently slammed against the bulletproof glass, their jagged jaws biting at the reinforced window. Panting, I looked up at the wall of security monitors, and my blood ran cold. They weren't just on level B3. Thousands of pale monsters were swarming the main concourse, crawling up the escalators and marching down tunnels that led straight to the suburbs. They were heading to the surface! The smell, the missing homeless people. It was all preparation. The underground was full. They were taking the city. Knowing I'd die if I stayed, I busted open the rusted emergency fire escape, scrambled up the shaft, and burst into the freezing back alley. I jumped on my motorcycle and sped onto the empty main street. As I drove under a flickering streetlight, I glanced in my rearview mirror. A figure stood at the intersection. It was wearing old Silas's oversized, dirty hoodie. As my engine roared past, the figure slowly raised its head. A pale, eyeless face smiled at me, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. They had learned to wear our clothes. They were blending in. That night, I drove straight to the mountains and never looked back. To this day, I never go out at night, and whenever the news reports a sudden spike in mysterious disappearances, I just turn off my TV, trembling. The story ends here. The basementers are likely still lurking beneath the concrete of your city. Tonight, if you smell rotting meat and ozone creeping under your door, what will you do when you realize your new neighbors aren't human? I'm Ren, a data analyst living an invisible, mundane life in a crowded city, until a rainy Tuesday when I woke up and realized something horrifying. I remembered everything, not just normal memories. I looked out the window, and my brain instantly counted exactly 342 raindrops on a passing taxi. I walked into the subway and immediately remembered every face, every smell, every exact temperature from my thousands of previous commutes. Medical textbooks call it hyperthymesia, but to me, it was a brutal overload. My brain had become an infinite capacity security camera with a broken pause button. With a brain that never forgets, I started seeing the glitches in our reality. 4 days later, waiting at a red light, I saw a man from behind. He wore my gray windbreaker with the exact same torn stitch on the shoulder and carried my scuffed briefcase. When the light turned green, he looked back. It was me, not a look-alike. My exact face, my mole, my eye bags. He stared at me with dead eyes, then walked down the subway stairs. My absolute memory told me this wasn't a hallucination. Over the next weeks, I saw them everywhere. A copy of me on a supermarket CCTV feed. Another me driving a passing car. I realized the terrifying truth. This wasn't an illness. It was a synchronization process. My brain was accidentally connecting to a central server, revealing the hidden layers of this city. Friday night, I risked my life to follow one of my clones. He slipped through a gap into an abandoned construction site. I followed, finding no machines, just a massive sinkhole with a rusted metal staircase leading into the abyss. My brain counted 89, 154, 342 steps down. At the bottom was a cavernous, sterile white, tiled subway station. No ticket booths, just endlessly spinning turnstiles. A glowing red LED sign read, Omienchali Itali Estioag. A silent, pitch-black train glided in. The doors slid open. Inside there were no seats. Hundreds of people were standing motionless, eyes closed, holding the overhead straps. Every single one of them was me. Different versions of Ren, in office clothes, in hospital gowns, in rags. Suddenly a robotic voice echoed, warning, anomalous entity detected, status awakened, ID 8492, synchronization exceeded, termination required. Instantly, hundreds of pairs of eyes snapped open. They turned to me, smiling grotesquely from ear to ear, and lunged out the doors. I ran for my life. Adrenaline pumped through my veins, but my cursed memory recorded every cracking bone and wheezing breath right behind my neck. I scrambled up 342 steps, their cold nails tearing my jacket. When I rolled onto the muddy street above and looked back, the sight was gone. There was only a mossy brick wall left. I quit my job. I've boarded up my windows and smashed every mirror. My perfect memory tortures me every night with the jagged smiles of my clones. This world is a simulation, and the people you meet might just be empty vessels, downloaded with fake memories. You don't believe me? That's fine. But now that you've heard this story, the system has registered your anomaly too. Next time you drop your keys and look at your reflection in a glass window, if your reflection stands perfectly still and smiles at you, congratulations, your synchronization has begun.